All right, so example 6, and we'll also find the exact value of these. All right, well, notice, first thing I notice is that we're taking the inverse of the trig function, right? All right, so what I was saying there is that we're taking the inverse sine of sine. So usually when we take something and we plug it into its inverse, it cancels out, right? So it's really what we're hoping for, and that's what will happen if that angle that's in there is within that range of my answer. So when we're talking about the inverse sine, remember that angle has to be between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. Well, the question is then, is pi over 8 in that range there? What's that? I just put the pi over 8 where the y was there, okay? So is pi over 8 between them? Yes. So that means that they will cancel each other out. And so my answer, oh, I'm sorry. I wrote pi over 8, but it's negative pi over 8. Still a yes, okay? It's still in there. I forgot my negative. Which means negative pi over 8 is my solution. So on B, again, we have a trig, the inverse of cosine, so we're really hoping that'll cancel. So we got to check, is 5 pi over 4, is that between 0 and pi? No. So we're going to have to do some work to see if we can figure out this answer. So one thing we know, though, is cosine is an even function. Do you remember that? Remember we talked about even and odd functions a while back, and we said that cosine and its reciprocal are the only even functions. Everything else is odd. So an even function means if I plug in cosine of positive x, it's the same exact answer as cosine of negative x. So to apply that to this, that means that cosine of 5 pi over 4 is equal to cosine of negative 5 pi over 4. But wait, negative 5 pi over 4 means I'm going to go clockwise 5 pi over 4. And is that between 0 and pi?
Yes.
Yes. So I need to find its coterminal angle so that when I put it into that inequality, it actually fits. So how do we find a coterminal angle? Add 2 pi to it.
Use direction, please.
So that means that cosine of 5 pi over 4 is the same thing as cosine of negative 5 pi over 4 plus the 2 pi. And so cosine of 5 pi over 4 is equal to cosine of... All right, so when you add those together, you got,
2 pi over 4.
which is that same angle we just looked at, right? So 3 pi over 4 is over here in quadrant 2, isn't it? So knowing that, then I can come back over here, and I can say, well, then that means that this is the inverse cosine of 3 pi over 4. And now 3 pi over 4 we know is between 0 and pi, so these cancel each other out, and we get 3 pi over 4.